All right, guys, welcome into Bama News, week 11 of the college football season. Alabama coming off a very close win over LSU, now preparing for New Mexico State. We're going to break down all the things Tide moving forward into week 11, as well as talk about where things can be tuned up a little bit. I'm Simone Eli alongside Patrick Greenfield. Welcome again to Bama News. And we're going to bring in the one and the only Michael Casagrande, the AL.com Alabama beat reporter who does all the things Alabama, Roll Tide. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. But looking back at last week's game, what's kind of the first thing that comes to your mind from what you saw at Bryant-Denny Stadium?
Well, there are a lot of things that come to mind. It wasn't the game that probably anybody was expecting to see. It wasn't the game I was there expecting to cover. Kind of had to adjust some things on the fly. 20-14 wouldn't have been a final score you could have convinced me of before the game. But yeah, I mean, LSU came out like a team, their hair on fire, trying to prove something that they're not gonna. You could go two different directions when your coach is effectively fired midseason and you have all your All-Americans go down with injuries. You can lay over and die, or you can fight back, and it looked like they fought back. And Alabama just wasn't as sharp, especially offensively. I mean, primarily offensively. Defensively, they were pretty strong. But it was just it's a weird night and a weird season. Pretty much all these games, they're not like the games that we're used to seeing with Alabama. A lot more interesting. It's not as assembly line mass destruction as they're had been doing a year ago. So it's more interesting, I guess.
Patrick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I just think, you got to give credit to Edo and LSU. You got to give credit to those 4 or 5-star athletes that they're always able to pull in. And I think, Michael, you had written about it, the cover zero, the look that LSU had not given the entire time of Orgeron's career at LSU. So they just had a really good game plan and came in. And then once you got into the thick of it in the rivalry, then Alabama could not really pull it out. I think we're going to be talking about the offensive line. That obviously was an issue, but LSU's scheme was the reason that they were able to kind of keep it that close.
Michael, I want to go back to a question that you asked Nick Saban last week, I believe, regarding kind of deciding to run or to pass. And Saban kind of responded in a way where he was talking about kind of taking what the defense gives you. It seems as though this offense really doesn't have a defined identity as to what it is that they want to do week in, week out. That number right there, kind of glaring, 6 rushing yards. Now, a big part of that was the sacks that were allowed on Bryce Young. But having asked that question and then having seen this game, how do you put those two together in terms of what Saban's response was?
Yeah, that's something I plan on writing about later on this week is the run pass relationship, what's working, what isn't. Game to game, it varies. Against Ole Miss, they ran 50 plus times, the most they'd run in a couple years, and then you come down to this game, 26 carries, I think it was, the fewest of the season, tied for the fewest rushing yards in the history of Alabama football, dating back to at least 1940. So. Yeah, I mean, it clearly wasn't working. They were getting no push up front. LSU brought in a whole different front that they hadn't shown all year, and gave Alabama's offensive line that had struggled at times and had an injury and some 2 players shuffling around in the middle of the game Saturday. So there were a lot of factors that kind of played into a worst case scenario for the ground game.
Pulling that back up. I was going to say, another problem, I think, obviously Bryce Young's style allows him to get sacked a lot more. He was sacked 21 times through 9 games. It's the most since Jalen Hurts. But his receivers aren't really helping. Bryce Young threw 24 passes, but to 6 different receivers, but 2 are running backs. Latu had 1 catch. Billingsley has seemingly disappeared. Michael could probably fill us in on that. So if you're just relying on Jamison Williams and John Mechie, and they're not getting downfield against these elite, cover zero against some great athletes on LSU, that's obviously a huge problem beside the offensive line and beside the running game.
Yeah. Michael, it's so easy to compare Alabama and their clientele, who they have available from year in and year out. Is it fair to criticize this offense when it comes to the receiver position and really not having the same type of caliber guys available? Maybe one or two, but I mean, the last couple of years, maybe the last 3 years or so, Alabama's had guys that, I mean, 4 or 5 deep at receiver who have been just mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the issue with the sacks is the guys aren't open downfield, and Young, I think he buys more time than most quarterbacks in the backfield. His ability to not only scramble but to move within the backfield and to try to give guys time to get open. But no one's open. He's not going to be able to get it to him. There's no, he's not forcing balls where he shouldn't be throwing them. He had a few times with 2 of the interceptions early in the season where he may have forced some passes. So I'm sure they would much rather him take a sack than to throw one into coverage and risk an interception. So, yeah, I mean, it's with anything with these offenses, it all takes everything working together. Yeah. There are times where he's sacked where it's just an all out, the sack fumble was just an all out jailbreak for LSU. They brought everyone and they just didn't have enough to block them. And other times it's effectively a coverage sack when there aren't guys open downfield. And that's some of the times, Tennessee, he took off and ran the most. He did a few times against LSU, but yeah, you can't throw to a target that's not open.
Sure.
It also feels like he's shifty and he's elusive, but he's not a game breaker. He had a really nice one against Tennessee. He had a really nice 3rd down run against Texas A&M, but he's not a weapon per se. With his legs, he can get away from the pass rush if he needs to, and but if you don't have an outlet, you're going to get sacked.
I appreciate all the good comments coming in regarding Bryce Young, this offense, some criticism, some deserved, some obviously just folks' opinion. Michael, how concerning is it, in your opinion, that LSU, an LSU team that's not like the LSU of 2019, was able to show Alabama some things that were different and kind of uprooted what their plan was? Because this is not the only tough game remaining on Alabama's schedule. I mean, they're going to go to the Iron Bowl on the road. Arkansas isn't god awful. And then, I mean, if you're in the SEC title game against the Georgia defense that ranks, number 1 in the country, it seems as though, okay, looking at this LSU team that was able to give them some problems could be an issue down the road for this team.
Yeah, I mean, they also had 2 weeks to prep and to put in to experiment with a little bit of these things behind the scenes. Granted, it wasn't like 2 full weeks. They weren't fully going all out in the bye week, and they had, like I said, a lot of injuries to begin with. So, yeah, I mean, it probably didn't make anybody feel any more comfortable about their Thanksgivings going into the Iron Bowl, knowing that just kind of what happens when Alabama plays at Auburn against a quality Auburn team. Things tend to get a little weird around there. So, yeah, I mean, it's with this season, again, with the way LSU played them close, I don't think there's really anything that could be taken for granted with Alabama. I mean, A&M, there weren't too many people that were expecting that to be an upset loss. I mean, Florida gave it to them, so, gave them everything they had. So it's kind of one of those years where, last year was almost too casual to watch. It was almost predetermined that you felt like it was gonna be fairly easy.
It also feels like the theme, especially with LSU, like when's Alabama struggled? Florida, Texas A&M, LSU, these teams that on the defensive side of the ball get these 5 stars, get these 4 stars easily. They don't have to try it. So you have all this talent athletically raw on those type of teams, and those are the ones that Alabama seems to have the most problem.
Sure.
Arkansas is going to have a little bit, but Auburn definitely will, and Georgia certainly will. So Bill O'Brien has to get that in check.
Yeah, we'll see. If you're just tuning in, it's BamaNews. Michael Casagrande joining Pat Greenfield and I going into week 11 of the season. Kind of time to turn the page for Alabama. A win is a win. Nick Saban was not going to really allow folks to be too critical of his team. It seemed like in the post game, he was able to turn the page in Monday's press conference now to New Mexico State. The Tide, of course, favored by 50 plus in this game. What's next, Michael? If you're looking at the drawing board, if you're looking at changes or something that's glaring, if there's something what is the message this week this is from his coaching staff to this team moving into this New Mexico State non-conference matchup?
I think they want to beat New Mexico State, right?
Yeah, good point.
They're not
That's such a
overlooking
Saban
that.
answer.
Are you going to overlook New Mexico State? Because I don't think Nick Saban wants you to overlook New Mexico.
I love that. I love it. I love it.
No, I mean, it's a lot of, turning the mirror on themselves, looking at what they're doing. I'm sure that it's not going to be a fun week for the offensive line in practice. I know there are a lot of people who are curious to see their, stacked with 5-star recruits from this 2021 recruiting class. If any of those guys were going to get any opportunity to come in. I think it was telling when Damian George came in at right tackle when Dalcourt went down to center and they moved Chris Owens back over there, that there were, I'm sure people were interested to see if maybe J.C. Latham would come in, one of the top 10 recruits from last year. He was listed on the depth chart as a backup, co-backup, and Damian George came in, and Saban didn't seem to be too disappointed with how he played. And I wouldn't expect to see Dalcourt out there this Saturday with a sprained ankle. So, there might be some, if you're really into the real depth chart X's and O's, what they come out with on the offensive line this week, if they keep the same look that they brought for the majority of that LSU game.
True.
And Simone, I'm not supposed to ask questions, but I'll ask one. Is this really just a scheme thing for Bill O'Brien? For Doug Marrone, for Michael, like for Doug Marrone, you get these big names, Bill O'Brien, Doug Marrone. I know there's a lot of turnover with Sark leaving, and you can't just plug and play the big names on the field or off the field. So is that a huge thing? Bill O'Brien's schemes? I know players moving out and getting hurt is one thing, but where do Doug Marrone and Bill O'Brien fit into Alabama's struggles?
And those are good questions. Something we're kind of working on. We're trying to work on to get more of that expert eye as to what are the differences between Sark's offense, Sarkisian's offense, Bill O'Brien's offense. Clearly the personnel is a huge difference between the two. Much different tools in a toolbox and better a year ago. So I think that's not a factor that can be ignored. But yeah, that's something. There's quite a bit of criticism of Bill O'Brien, and that's something that we're kind of want to get a little deeper into. From players, people who've played, who you can see those little things that their degrees of football expertise, and I think we need to drill a little bit deeper to people who can see the finer points of things that can analyze that better. So I wish I had a better answer for it, but we're working on that.
All right, guys. Well, tonight we will get our second college football playoff ranking. Last week, Alabama was second in the country. We were able to, at least on this show, because we like to have fun, throw out our rankings. We're going to do that again, but tonight's ranking show is going to be at 6:00. Let's take a look, Patrick, if we can, at.
We got you.
You were critical at me and my picks on this, but this is what I have. Georgia, I don't think there's any question Georgia's going to be number one in the country. Alabama, although coming off of an LSU game that I felt like was, very mediocre and not great at all. I think you can read that from the comments. I think who is better? Like, who are you going to put there? Oklahoma staying undefeated. And then Cincinnati, I'm going to continue to ride this Cincinnati thing because, who else, first of all the Bearcats can do is win all of their games. I'm not saying anyone wants to see a Georgia versus Cincinnati matchup, so I know folks are going to criticize me for that. But at the end of the day, this early in the rankings, we still have a couple weeks to go. Why not throw Cincinnati a bone and see what they can do right now with 3 weeks to play?
I'd like to see Georgia-Cincinnati, if only for last year. Let's see a rematch of that. Although Georgia is a buzzsaw, I'll just throw mine and we'll keep going. Obviously I have Georgia first. I have to go with the committee though. Oregon has seemingly been one of the most impressive teams. They beat Fresno State. They beat Ohio State. That has to count for something, and it does if you go look at the selection rules. And then Ohio State looks better than Cincinnati. I'll throw Michael out there too if he wants to go along. Ohio State is one of the best teams, but you cannot discredit the Oregon win in Columbus. You
also can't forget Oregon lost to a 3-win Stanford team too.
I agree, but there was a bad call at the end. There's a bad call.
What are you gonna do? Go through every single game in college football and say there's a bad call here, there's a bad call here?
Full disclosure, my mom's a big Duck fan, but
if you're leaving it to a bad call against a 3-win team, then your problem. There's your problem. I thought about Cincinnati, but I mean, each week they keep playing closer and closer games, and if they're wanting that wow factor, if they're trying to impress, that they're a cut, they're an elite in their conference to the point where they could compete with the big kids, having a near fumble at the goal, and they came a fingernail away from upset against Tulsa on Saturday. Oklahoma, I think their eye test wasn't passing against Kansas the week before, but they had an impressive win Saturday, so that may have impressed, undefeated still Big 12 team. Oregon was a close game. Ultimately, this stuff doesn't matter. They'll figure it out at the end. All these things will work itself out in the end.
Mike, I do. We talked to Rodak last week. Do you feel as though the only shot that a group of 5 school has of being in the college football playoff is when the playoff is extended?
I mean, it just depends on the scenarios. I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's I guess there would have to be some real demolition derby figure eights going on to take out a lot of the bigger name schools to where the door would be that open. But I think I feel like it's possible this year if Cincinnati were to win out and all the different scenarios of teams, the top 10, the top 5, 6 teams have to play each other with, Michigan State's pretty much they're on the outside now. They got to play Ohio State. Georgia and Alabama play. So there is an opportunity for Alabama to lose, for Ohio State to lose, where the door could open, but
sure.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama and Georgia, Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan, and Ohio State has to play Michigan State.
Yeah.
Oklahoma's got to play Baylor. All these big Power 5 teams are heavy on the back end. Cincinnati, if you do want to do it, we mentioned this last week, it almost has to be a continuation of last year, and you have to have a lot of those same players, but you also have to beat Tulsa by 50 points or 40 points. You have to blow out these teams to show that, and I just don't. I like the little schools. I'm a G5 fan, but I just don't think Cincinnati has enough with the last 2 weeks, the way that they've gone. So
yeah, well, we will.
But they're all going to beat each other.
We will see tonight. But again, even tonight's rankings from the committee really don't matter that much. We still have about a month to go before we really know how things are going to shape up. Regardless, I think that we can all agree that it's Georgia and it's Alabama right now. It's really Georgia and everybody else, but Alabama, where are you going to put them? Second probably is the place to be right now. That's probably where they will be tonight. But guys, thanks so much for tuning in to Bama News, week 11 of the college football season. You're remembered in November or whatever it is that Nick Saban and all of them say. So this is a pretty important month in terms of what the Tide do moving forward. Alabama hosts New Mexico State before hosting Arkansas and then going on the road for the Iron Bowl this year. But thanks so much to Michael Casagrande, AL.com Tide beat reporter, and Patrick Greenfield for joining us today. I'm Simone Eli. Y'all enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.